And in fact, I went out across the country and interviewed over 5,000 people that within the last year had graduated from different speed reading courses, and found that over 90% of them had regressed back to reading within 6 weeks after graduating out of speed reading courses. And that just didn't make sense to me. It didn't logic out at all, because speed reading worked. I knew that for a fact. Comprehension is better, retention is better for when you speed read, plus you're saving time. And that wasn't just statistics coming out of the speed reading industry, that was coming from the National Education Association. It was pretty much across the board. Speed reading works. The problem was, why? Why were people regressing? Why were people not holding on to this skill when in fact it worked, and in many cases they'd spend hundreds of dollars to learn how to speed read? And what I kept hearing when I asked that question to people over and over again went something like this. They would say, gosh, I'm no longer saying all the words to myself like I do when I read. I'm no longer sub-vocalizing, if you will, all the words. So I must be skimming and scanning. And if I'm skimming and scanning, I'm not getting it all, so I better go back to reading. And what they were doing was literally talking themselves out of using this skill that they had learned called speed reading. Now, that really didn't make sense to me at the time. Of course, I was a real neophyte when it came to the mind, and I still am today, by the way. I readily admit that. The more I learn about the brain, the more I know I don't know. But the fact is, in those days, I didn't even know what the subconscious was. That was a foreign word to me. I came out of a very structured lifestyle. At any rate, now I know today that the conscious mind was literally talking these people out of using this skill. My next question following that was, I wonder what's happening to all these words when you speed read that are no longer being sub-vocalized, because you're coming down the page at such a speed, it's physically impossible to sub-vocalize or say all the words to yourself as you do when you read. And those words that are not being sub-vocalized, my thought was, gosh, maybe they're being utilized within the brain somehow, and that's why comprehension is better and retention is better. I went around to the heads of different speed reading companies, including Evelyn Woods herself, who developed speed reading following World War II, and asked that question. What happens to the words that are no longer being sub-vocalized? And the answer was, I don't know. I didn't have an answer that was positive from anyone in the industry. No one had ever taken the time to find out the answer to that question. So I set out, being a real neophyte, not an educator, not a psychologist. I didn't realize things couldn't be done. And so I set out to find out what does happen to these words that are no longer being sub-vocalized. I think they're actually being used in the brain. I set up pilot classes in my schools in Phoenix, and ranged initially from age 9 to age 72, later on from 5 to 92. And in those classes we had varying IQs, varying learning disabilities represented, certainly varying age brackets, and varying socioeconomic backgrounds. And I instructed my instructors to take these people faster and faster and faster through the material to eliminate more and more sub-vocalizing, and measure very specifically through written tests what the results would be as they went faster and faster and eliminated more and more of the sub-vocalizing. And lo and behold, the direct correlation came about very rapidly. Comprehension was better and retention was longer as sub-vocalizing was eliminated. And once we got to the point where it was physically impossible to sub-vocalize any words on the page, and therefore it was physically impossible really to focus on the page, that was the reason for it, and this happens at approximately 2 pages per second, at that speed, the comprehension peaked and the retention became 100%. Now what had happened at that point was the sensations of reading had completely disappeared. There was no sub-vocalizing involved at all. There was no saying of the words to ourselves involved. There was no focusing on the page required at all. Therefore, it was unnecessary to wear glasses. It bypassed problems like dyslexia, and certainly bypassed 99%, if you will, of all the learning disabilities that we know of, because they're all conscious level disabilities. What had happened was we had opened up a direct path through the brain to a very specific part of the subconscious part of the brain, which was literally taking a verbatim picture of the information as it went by at the rate of 2 pages a second or faster.